If you're watching this because someone you love has passed away from mesothelioma, I'm deeply sorry for your loss. You may be wondering whether it's too late to file a legal claim or whether claims die with the patient. The answer is, in most cases, family members can still file wrongful death claims, even after the patient has passed away. Today, I want to explain how this works, who can file, what time limits apply, and what these claims can recover. I'm Terri Oppenheimer. I've been writing about mesothelioma and asbestos for the website mesothelioma.net for over a decade. I'm not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice, but I'm going to walk you through what you need to know about wrongful death claims for mesothelioma. Let's start with the fundamental question. Yes, family members can generally file mesothelioma claims after the patient has died. These are called wrongful death claims, and they're designed to compensate families for the loss of their loved one and the financial impact of that loss. Who can file a wrongful death claim depends on state law, which varies. In most states, the personal representative of the deceased person's estate files the wrongful death claim. This is typically the person named as executor in the will, or if there's no will, someone appointed by the probate court. Often that's the surviving spouse or adult child. Some states allow specific family members to file directly. That's usually the surviving spouse, children, or parents if the deceased was unmarried with no children. The key point is that not just anyone can file. There are legal rules about who has standing to bring wrongful death claims. If your loved one was already pursuing a mesothelioma claim when they passed away, that claim doesn't disappear. The personal representative, whoever it is, can usually continue the existing lawsuit as a wrongful death claim. The case doesn't start over. It continues with modified damages to reflect the death. If your loved one never filed a claim during their lifetime, family members can still file a wrongful death claim after death, but there are time limits that apply, and these are critically important. Let's talk about them. They're called statutes of limitations because this is where many families run into problems. Every state has time limits for filing wrongful death claims, and they vary by state, but they typically range from 1 to 3 years. The critical question is when the clock starts. For wrongful death claims, the clock usually starts on the date of death, not the date of diagnosis. So if your loved one passed away on January 15th, 2025, and your state has a 2-year statute of limitations for wrongful death, you generally have until January 14th, 2027 to file. However, and this is important, some states have shorter time limits. Some jurisdictions require filing within 1 year of death, and there can be exceptions and complications depending on when exposure occurred, where it occurred, and other factors. This is why you should contact an asbestos attorney as soon as possible after your loved one's death. Don't assume you have plenty of time and wait months or years. Statutes of limitations are strict, and if you miss the deadline, you permanently lose the right to file a claim. Now, what can wrongful death claims recover? The types of damages available in wrongful death claims differ somewhat from what the patient could have recovered in a personal injury claim filed during their lifetime. Wrongful death claims typically can recover funeral and burial expenses, medical expenses related to the final illness that were not covered by insurance, lost financial support, meaning the income and benefits the deceased would have provided to their family, loss of household services, like the value of work the deceased performed around the household, and loss of companionship, guidance, and consortium. This means compensation for the non-economic loss of the relationship. Some states also allow recovery for the deceased person's pain and suffering before death, though this varies by jurisdiction. What wrongful death claims generally cannot recover is compensation for the deceased person's emotional distress or other purely personal damages. Those claims die with the person. The focus of a wrongful death claim is on compensating the family for their losses, not the deceased for theirs. Settlement amounts for wrongful death claims can be substantial, much like personal injury claims filed during the patient's lifetime. Factors that affect the value include the deceased's age at death. Younger victims typically result in higher compensation due to more years of lost support. The financial dependency of survivors. If the deceased was the primary breadwinner supporting a spouse and children, economic losses are significant. The strength of evidence linking exposure to specific defendants is key, and the number of potential defendants and available compensation sources matter too. One important thing to keep in mind: if your loved one received compensation from legal settlements or trust fund claims during their lifetime, that generally does not prevent you from filing a wrongful death claim. The wrongful death claim compensates the family for different damages than what the patient received. However, there is a concept called offset or credit, where defendants may argue that compensation already paid should reduce what they owe in a wrongful death claim. How this works depends on state law and the specific circumstances of the case. For trust fund claims specifically, family members can often file claims after the patient's death, even if the patient never filed during their lifetime. Trust funds typically have separate claim processes for estates and survivors. VA benefits, they work differently. If the veteran with mesothelioma was receiving VA disability compensation and then passed away, the disability compensation ends. However, surviving spouses may be eligible for dependency and indemnity compensation, or DIC, which provides monthly payments to surviving spouses of veterans who died from service. As of 2025, DIC pays over $1,500 per month to surviving spouses. Now, here's a practical issue that comes up. What if you don't have clear documentation of your loved one's asbestos exposure? Maybe they worked decades ago and you don't have employment records. Maybe they never talked much about their work. Don't assume that you can't pursue a claim just because you don't personally know all the details of their exposure. Attorneys who are experienced in mesothelioma cases have resources to help reconstruct your loved one's exposure history. They have databases of companies that used asbestos, access to employment records through various sources, the ability to track down former coworkers who might remember the working conditions your loved one faced, and experts who can testify about typical exposure in specific occupations and industries. Start a conversation with an asbestos attorney and check and see what can be documented. Another question that families often ask: what if my loved one was exposed in multiple states or worked for companies in different locations? Jurisdiction can be complex, but experienced mesothelioma attorneys handle multi-state cases on a regular basis. You might file in the state where your loved one lived, where they were exposed, where defendants are located, or another jurisdiction depending on various factors. What if the companies responsible are bankrupt? As we've discussed, bankruptcy does not necessarily end your ability to recover compensation. Many bankrupt asbestos companies have established trust funds specifically to pay future claims. You can file claims against these trusts even after the patient's death. The process of pursuing a wrongful death claim typically involves these steps: consulting with a mesothelioma attorney to evaluate the case, gathering documentation such as a death certificate, medical records, employment history, and any other relevant information, filing the claim within the statute of limitations, investigation and discovery, which is when the attorney investigates exposure and builds the case, negotiations with defendants or trust fund claims, and finally, settlement or trial if the case doesn't settle. Most wrongful death claims do settle rather than going to trial. Settlements can often be reached within 1 or 2 years of filing, though some cases do take longer. So, can your family still file a mesothelioma claim after you're gone? Yep, they can. Wrongful death claims allow families to recover compensation for funeral expenses, medical bills, lost financial support, and loss of companionship. Time limits do apply, typically 1 to 3 years from date of death, depending on the state. So contact an attorney promptly. Don't assume it's too late or that you lack sufficient documentation. Experienced attorneys can help reconstruct exposure history and pursue compensation for your family. For more information about wrongful death claims, visit mesothelioma.net and sign up for our free guide. Or, if you'd prefer to speak to one of our patient advocates, call 1-800-692-8608 or use the live chat feature on the website. As for me, remember to post your questions below, and I'll see you next time.